And now let's chat with Eve Friedman. So today on March 21st, it's the so-called Early Music Day here in Europe, and it's an initiative developed by the European Early Music Network. So it's really my great pleasure to be welcoming Dr. Eve Friedman to talk about the subject of tone development on the Baroque flute. So if you don't have the book yet, it looks like this. And Eve holds teaching positions at Drexel, Temple, as well as Rowan universities, and is a versatile and active player both on historical flutes as well as modern flute. So thank you very much, Eve, for coming and spending the time with us.
Thank you so much for asking. And you don't have to call me Dr. Friedman, for heaven's sake.
we, I just have to.
I
You
know.
earned your doctorate, so
Yes,
I still have to introduce you that way.
I certainly did. No, I'm
All right. Okay. Yes. So we are recording now. Yeah. Okay. Good. So for anyone who, sorry, I'm just getting a message here. Okay. Can everyone hear me? All right. Yep. Okay. Excellent. Okay. Good. So for those of you who don't know Eve's book yet, Eve, would you mind explaining what's the purpose of your publication?
sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. So the purpose was originally, I love to make up exercises for myself and my students. And originally, the purpose was to get a better tone on the Baroque flute for myself. And it wasn't until I had written a whole bunch of these down that I realized I should probably be sharing them. And the book started as my doctoral paper at Indiana University. Um, so I could tell you how I came to the topic, all the way through. But basically, I just wasn't satisfied with my own tone, and especially the process of switching between modern flutes and Baroque flutes, which I do still to this day, pretty much every day, both. So it's a hard thing to switch between. But when I was a student, I was studying both and felt, I would go 1 hour and then 2 hours later I'd be on the other one and they both sounded bad. So it was, and then I thought, okay, so I should practice Moïse on the modern flute. And then what do I practice on the Baroque flute? There's nothing there. And so then I started looking, and there is something there, but I was making up stuff for myself. And I found that it really helped.
And do you have a theory as to why there weren't as many these kind of tone development exercises or etudes as we would have, as we know it from later periods?
I don't have a great answer for that. I mean, there's more of everything now, right? So there's just been more time. And so everybody um, just, you get that information from past teachers on to other teachers who are passed down. Your great, 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 great grand teacher might have been Moise himself. And um, so I don't know. I mean, that the 18th century, we'll get into this later, but the 18th century treatises, they do talk about it a little. I think it's a hard thing to write about. And if they're writing a book about the flute in general, or maybe about music making in general, which some of them are, maybe there's just not time for it.
No, no. Okay, and we'll definitely get into that in greater detail.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm going to start my screen share here. Just give me a second. Okay, everyone can see this all right? Yeah. So this is a question I put in the waiting room and asking everyone to express what they find challenging in terms of tone on the Baroque flute. If you haven't already, you can either scan the QR code with your smartphone and key in your answers that way, or you can go to menti.com, type in the code on top of there, go on a separate browser to do that, and then you can also answer the question that way. And we'll get back to the questions then in just a bit, okay? And so while you're doing that, I want to touch on the first part of Eve's book, which is basically a summary of early treatises from the perspective of tone. And I really highly recommend this section to people, especially for those of you looking for introductory material. If this everything is new to you, that's a great as an introduction to all these different treatises. And even for those of you who know something about these treatises already, it's just really interesting to compare and contrast each of these authors on how they talk about tone from a variety of perspectives. So whether it's about how to practice, so there's not much, but we do have a few examples, sound production techniques, and also how to deal with difficult performance situations. So one fun thing that I always like is, for example, both quants and tromlets talk about how to deal with performing in hot temperature and if your flute is slipping away from your chin. So Quant says to dab a little bit of powder from your wig and apply it to your chin that way, whereas Tromlets says that's just crappy advice from Quants. It doesn't work. You just get gunky all over and it slips anyway. And he basically says, well, you should just refuse to play in when it's too hot, which I think that's a great attitude. You know, I don't play in hot weather.
They needed to invent some air conditioning, I guess.
Yeah, probably in those hot, stuffy palaces, right? That's I can imagine that. Okay. So anyway, a lot of great stuff in this section, and also just mention a couple of things in connection with it. Okay, so here you see, this is a very famous image, of course, from Autoteur's Principe, and this is the first thing that we see right next to the first chapter talking about posture. And it's a beautiful engraving of this flute player, and it looks elegant, but as beautiful as it looks, I want to talk about this as I think it can be misleading for some people. Eve, you have mentioned this in your book as well. Tell us about it. What's problematic with this image?
It was inevitable that I would mention this in my book. As some of you who know me know, I've studied Alexander technique for many, many years, and it has saved my career probably 3 or 4 times over. And anyone who has any background in body use looks at this and, you know, where do I begin? What is right about it as opposed to what's wrong? The wig is gorgeous, right? The hair, but the turn of the head, he talks about turning the head to the left, but then the picture is tilted to the left. And I understand the inclination to do that, but it hurts just looking at it, quite honestly. I personally, hold on, let me get to a better position here. I personally feel like it's an excellent idea to turn to the left, as opposed to crossing the entire body with your left arm. For me, that creates just too much tension here. And actually on the inside, it gets very tight very quickly. So on all the transverse flutes, I like to turn my head to the left. And then the flute is actually like kind of closer in terms of this left arm. So I think that's good here. But if you look at, he's also doing this, which just hurts. And I don't see how that possibly helps your tone.
I wonder if it has something to do with the fact that, you know, this is obviously a low pitch, this is going to be a low pitch instrument, right? Autoteur, which is, it's larger, it's longer, these turns, these pieces here, most likely made from ivory, you know, the flute was just heavier. Maybe that had something to do with the fact that he's just from the weight.
I'm not sure it's heavier than my Powell that I play, a modern flute. I don't know. I mean, yeah, I think, you know, my experience is don't bring yourself to the flute, bring the flute to you. It's much more comfortable if you want to play for more than just a few years. You have to figure out a way for it to be comfortable. Maybe for him it's comfortable. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, even if it's a heavier instrument, yeah, I would say also to watch out that doesn't that just doesn't look like a good long-term solution.
Yeah, I mean, having the flute at an angle, by the way, get myself in the right position here. The flute does not have to be parallel to the floor for all of this to happen. You can turn your head to the left and have the flute at a downward angle. You have to adjust your embouchure a lot, right? I have never been able to figure out how to play this way on any flute. I would love to, because it's easier. Because as you said, if it feels heavy or you're tired or you have to play for 8 hours in a day, this is great. But I sound terrible. I have to have it here. I've tried.
Okay, great.
But plenty of flutists play out of the side, or it's not symmetrical, and none of that is a problem in terms of tone production.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So, experienced players will know that we have to control our air quite differently on the Baroque flute compared to the modern flute. And actually, on both instruments, there are also differences in how we approach the high or low register, whether you have to change your, moderate your air or something with the embouchure. So one thing that strikes me about a lot of these treatises is that there's actually very little direct mentioning of moderating airspeed. So they kind of go in really roundabout ways, and although we can sometimes deduce what is implied, they tend to use phrases that I think which can be confusing, as you see on the slide here. And the only author included in Eve's book who specifically uses the word velocity is John Gunn, or perhaps we can deduce from Lewis Granum that he's talking about a slower airstream when he uses the word retention, although that sounds also kind of vague and maybe hard to understand. So I always tell my learners to slow down your air. And the difference is really significant, especially if you're coming from the modern flute. Eve, would you mind commenting on that distinction between volume and velocity for Baroque flute playing, and maybe clarify that for our audience here?
Yeah, I mean, on any flute, I think that is one of the hardest things to teach, is the difference between the amount of air and the speed of the air. I know it when I hear it in myself and my students for sure. And honestly, the best way I've ever found to teach it is when someone is getting one or the other, point it out, make sure they hear, because it's a muscle memory thing. You feel when you're doing it, but it is very hard to describe. And I do a majority of my teaching remotely now, private lessons, and I can still hear it, and it makes very little difference. It's really interesting. So I like to teach. I mean, to me, the idea of airspeed is simply another word for support. And so I do have an exercise that I teach to kind of have people feel where the diaphragm is, and to look at a drawing, an anatomical drawing, to see where it is, because a lot of people think it's this way. It's like the same as the stomach muscles, but actually knowing that it's under your lungs. And I think it's just helpful to see it. And to realize that probably the diaphragm is not something you can decide to move, but the muscles around it are going to influence it. So I use a lot of description like that, and then I do have an exercise. I can describe the exercise if you want, or that's
Yeah, sure, maybe go ahead. I'm
okay.
sure many will be interested.
So I just always sitting down, because you can get dizzy doing this. I have people make a very, very loud S, like louder than you even think that you could, and with a crescendo. And what happens there is you create resistance with your tongue. And that's a resistance that we don't have on the flute, because we have no reed, nothing. So I'll just move my camera here. If you put your hand kind of, I guess, upper abdomen below the rib cage, and you take a large breath, the S should be so loud that you really actually feel something happening down there.
Hmm.
You can put your hands in the back also, and you can put your hands like around, depending on how big your hands are, everything on the side and all that. And you can feel, because that means that you're engaging the diaphragm, right? So it's possible to make that same feeling, and as I was talking about muscle memory before, you could have that same feeling without the S. Then you take a breath and, but do the same thing down below, which you don't have to do, right? You can do it without that, and then you don't have good airspeed.
That's
So
true.
then you do that, and you could blow more or less like this, but still have that feeling all around that everything's sort of engaged. And it's not tight, but it's engaged. This is, again, my Alexander language.
Yeah. Well, actually, I never thought about it that way. Yeah, that's a great connection to draw.
Well, people say
Yeah.
push the air out, and I don't like to push
No,
anything.
I don't like push either.
Yeah.
I like to use the analogy like you're giving warm air. Like if you were to, like blow, but having warm air, as opposed to if you're just blowing. If you're blowing cool air,
Mhm.
that's going to be a higher. That's going to give a higher airspeed. And so
Also a different vowel shape. Yeah.
definitely, yeah, that your here is more open than in the
Huh?
cavities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the final step is you can then just put up a flute. You can have your right hand hold the flute, your left hand still in that same place, in the front at least. And then you don't worry about pitch, you don't worry about anything, you just hear the sound and then do it without that feeling down below. And it's flat, of course.
Hmm.
Then there's no support.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any of my colleagues want to comment on that? Don't mean to put anybody on the spot, but if you want to say anything, go ahead and unmute yourselves and go ahead.
Absolutely.
Okay, well,
Thanks, Amanda.
oh, did Amanda?
She's going to use that exercise. Thank you.
Oh, okay, great. Sorry, I didn't see in the chat. Yeah. Excellent. Okay, good. Let's go on then. So this is also one of the authors that you've talked about. This top illustration here is from John Gunn's treatise, School of the German Flute. Like other authors before him, around the same time as him, the few tone exercises that we do have from the 18th century are these kind of so-called mezza di voce, where you crescendo and decrescendo on a long note. And I find it really interesting to see that he uses these large hairpins, so the crescendo large signs, yeah, to illustrate notes where one can achieve a greater dynamic range. So all the so-called bright notes on the Baroque flute, like D, G, and to a certain extent A, but also the smaller hairpins for notes that have more of a limited dynamic range. And these will be so-called the covered notes on the Baroque flute, and Eve will talk more about that about those differences later in our exercises. This second illustration here is from an anonymous treatise of 1756, where the author seems to be focusing more on the difficulties in tone production on the transverse flute. So he then suggests having these wings constructed around the mouth hole, and apparently he brought it to Thomas Lott of the famous Lott flute making family. We see similar things now in some modern flute and piccolo designs, and I just thought it interesting to understand that the subject of embouchure, kind of our pursuit of the ultimate and perfect embouchure, that is indeed a bit of an elusive thing in transverse flute playing. And so they were certainly preoccupied with it even back then. Oops. And I also want to touch briefly on how some of these early authors described an ideal flute sound. Again, these are taken and summarized from Eve's book, and many of these authors obviously use the human voice as an analogy, that it should be flexible, has both depth and brilliance, and of course, with good intonation. And Tromlitz uses a couple of adjectives which I want to explain. So he says that the flute should not sound hollow, dull, and wooden. And the word he uses is hölzern, which does come from the word Holz in German, meaning wood. So readers might be thinking, well, what's that? That's the Traverso is made out of wood, right? That's what they had back then. So Eve talks about this, and I just want to add that in German, hölzern, the adjective, is a way to describe something as stiff or awkward. So that's certainly very understandable here. And Tromlitz also advocates for a sound that's metallic, so die viel Metall hat. Yeah? And Ardell Powell points out in his translation that we have to put ourselves back in the 18th century, where they would have known kind of this really warm, harmonic, rich sounds of natural horns and trumpets. If you're not familiar with these early brass instruments, check out on YouTube, take a listen, and you'll be able to understand. So what Tromlitz is talking about here is a really kind of a round, warm, ringing sound, and not metallic as we might imagine as being shrill or piercing. Okay, so let's see what our readers have to say in terms of difficulties on the Baroque flute. Okay, keeping a consistent tone, overdriving the instrument and keeping it pure.
Mm-hmm.
Overdriving the instrument. Yeah, I would relate that with, for example, using too fast of an air or too much air. Perhaps.
It's easy to overblow a Traverso.
Well, that for sure. Pure, I suppose it can mean both things, whether it's intonation or kind of pureness in the quality.
Sure.
And because the mouth hole is so much smaller than on the modern flute, and also the shape of the hole itself, it's definitely it requires a lot more finer muscles to achieve a pure sound, one that's not, I like to use the word fuzzy, that's not noisy around the sound. And intonation, sure, there are notes that are just, a lot more uneven, as we would know on the modern flute. And same thing with keeping a consistent tone.
Yeah, I look at these three answers, and I'm thinking about John Gunn and the size of the crescendos, and how he has that. Can you go back to that? He has that in the key of D, right? There's an F sharp.
Sure. I just have to go back here.
Right. So there's an F sharp and there's an E natural with the teeniest, tiniest swell you can possibly imagine. So what's going to be for the F natural?
Yeah, right.
Horrifying thought, isn't it? I guess he's just trying to make a point there, but
Yeah. It's too bad he doesn't have one for D minor. But yeah, F natural, that would be just, a micro hairpin right there.
Yeah, because I mean that's a perfect example of how I look at these sources and I thought, well, but then this isn't the hard part, right? That's a D major scale. Like, throw me a bone. Like, what do you do?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I have to start easy first. You want to?
You do.
Yeah, I can't.
But the comment there about a consistent tone, I think this visual is kind of proof that it's not really possible to be even. You can be consistent in having a good tone, right? But let's not confuse that with evenness.
In the same way as the modern flute
Can be
can,
even,
can be.
should be, and that's what we were. That's what Moise's initial book is all about. You know, I mean, his most famous book. Yeah, I'm talking about De La Sonorité. Yeah.
So, yep. Yeah.
Great.
Okay. Great. Okay. Well, I don't want to keep people any further. I'll hand the mic over to Eve now. And if you have any questions along the way, feel free to put in the chat. And we certainly hope to get as many questions answered as we can. And there'll also be an open Q&A at the end of the session. So without further ado, I'm going to stop my screen share and hand it over to Eve now.
Thank you, Teddie. Keep me on track if I get on a tangent. And I welcome questions in the middle because that can really clarify what you know what's being
Sure,
said.
I'll monitor that.
Sure, thank you. Okay, so the basic setup of the exercises for me was we have good notes and we have bad notes. I'm just going to be blunt, right? We have like bright notes and we have cover notes. We have fingerings and we have forked fingerings. And of course, the forked fingerings are harder notes to get a good tone on. But the fact that they are different is what I was struggling with so much when I was kind of newer. And then hearing, you know, people play and sometimes even professionals, and I thought, well, they're not really mastering that. Like, I feel like that the topic just needed some addressing. So this is my little attempt to address it. So I divided all the notes of the instrument into kind of good and bad, which some of the other authors do too. So I started with messa di voce, you know, crescendo, diminuendo on each note. But first you do all the good notes. And then I actually follow that with exercises on all of those notes. And then we go to like the bad notes, the covered pitches, I call them. So I call them bright and covered in the book, which is much nicer than good and bad. So Amanda's following along. We're on page 49 if you're following where the exercises are. So I'm gonna just share that part. Hold on one second. Can everybody see that? Okay, I'm gonna move it where I can see it. Okay, so this is the exercise written out. So I did sharps on the way up, flats on the way down, but any note that I felt like kind of naturally, it's pretty simple and straightforward. You can do a crescendo, diminuendo, and I figured the hardest thing to do is start softly when you're doing something like this. So I have two different ways to do it, where you start kind of medium, go to loud, and then go to soft. And I have my students do it this way too on any instrument. But you don't start with the softest thing because that makes you really tight and it's pretty difficult to get your best tone and to be in tune, of course, as you said, Teddie. So if you try to start soft, sometimes you kind of clench up and it's too low anyway. So to me, it's a constant, like raise the pitch, lower the pitch, raise the pitch. Like I'm working against the natural inclination of more air does make you sharp, so you have to like adjust that. And there's many different ways to adjust. If anybody has their flute with them, you're welcome to try it right now. I was just using a D in the middle, and see if you think I'm right that it's harder to start really softly. I mean, hopefully I can do it now, you know. Like that was a soft start, which I don't recommend the very first time you do it, you know?
I think that's a great tip because yeah, this idea of starting soft is like I think people can get very nervous because like oh my god, I have to first like you start with kind of a specific control already, and that's can be intimidating.
Yeah, and it's probably the last thing we should do. It has to be open and free, right? But it's hard. It's a big ask. When I'm doing a long tone like this and changing dynamics, I count in my head, and I count louder toward the middle. And this is to keep it like even, so that even that I spend the same amount of time getting louder and getting softer. Um, so that's another tip. In my head, it sounds like 1, 2, 3, 4, like this, if I'm counting to 4. That can keep me even. I don't do it with a metronome because that's too distracting. I've got too many other things to think about. And it's sort of non-metric anyway, but I like to keep it steadily getting louder, steadily getting softer. I think that's important. So how do we adjust the pitch? I mean, um, there's so many places we could go wrong here in terms of pitch. If you do nothing, you're going to be flat at the beginning, sharp in the middle, flat at the end, right? So in the book, which was quite a few years ago now, I mention different vowel shapes, and speed of air and height of fingers and angle. So you can roll out, like I'm sure everybody knows, if you roll in, you're going to be lower, and if you roll out, you're going to be higher. So you can use that to your benefit slightly, not to that degree, but let's see, I'll start loud. And kind of lifting the head changes the angle of the air. As I'm getting softer, it might raise the pitch and keep me a little steadier. So that's another thing that you can do. Probably everybody also knows that the height of your fingers can change things. So I'll do G. So if your fingers are really close, you can adversely affect your pitch, but you could use that to your advantage if you want. Like an F sharp, it's really important that these two fingers be raised in general, right? So we can use that, but that's only a little help, honestly. So I want to talk a little bit more about the vowel shape idea, because that's the shape inside of your mouth. And I talk about it in the book as, did I use ah and oo? I think that's how we said it, yeah. But yeah, father and something else was like our words. We had a hard time figuring out how to do that because realizing that everybody was going to sound different depending on what country they were in reading that. So to me, I'm from Jersey, so like, ah is an ah, but the publisher was really smart about getting that distinct. So we're talking about ah, which means like a vertical, and that lowers the pitch. So we're going to want to use that when we're playing louder. Sorry. There's an exercise later about pitch bending, and you can use the same technique. But since the book came out, I've gotten really, really curious about what that involves. Like when you say vowel shape, what's actually moving? And I've become really interested in the position of my tongue. And I want to mention that now because it's really beneficial. Like it's changed a lot of stuff for me. So if you're blowing and your tongue is like, I don't know what the word concave or convex, I can't remember, but if it's like curved this way and high, like if you raise the middle of your tongue, that can be an ooh, an extreme ooh. So instead of just ooh, you're ooh, and you've got this like ramp with your tongue. And I'm getting softer, but I'm getting higher, which is like not the normal way that things go. So I guess when I'm doing that, I might be tucking the tip of the tongue underneath my bottom teeth, but I'm not sure that you have to do it that way. Probably everybody's different anyway. And then the reverse, of course, is true. If you're saying ah, it's not only vertical space so that your jaw actually drops, but your tongue goes with it, then you really get a change, right? So I'm just going to play a D. Like all I did was drop my tongue to the bottom of my mouth. You can try that. I'm not rolling. I didn't change the air actually. So all those things together, you have a lot of skills, you know. Okay, how are we doing? Is it clear?
No problem. Do you recommend doing these with like on a drone with a
Oh,
tuner?
yes. Good question. Good. So long tones in general, and these are no exception. Um, Absolutely, with a drone is a great idea, but not at first. Like at first, if we're talking about dynamics, you kind of learn the dynamics. And then once you can change the dynamics, um, I mean, I'm talking about like a week, not like 3 months, you know. But once you figure out how to do it, yeah, you introduce the tuner, 100%. Um, And that can be in terms of a drone or in terms of a needle. This is one of the best uses of the needle, of watching the needle, that I can think of, is these long tones with change of dynamics. In general, it's probably smarter for us to be using a drone rather than a needle because we're in real life, we're listening, we're not looking, right? But this is so hard, especially with the covered pitches, um, that I do use a needle for it, and I think it's valid. And then you can see how long it takes you to adjust and all of that. But yeah, with a drone, definitely, I do that a lot. Put the tuner on a drone on the same note, maybe on a fifth below also.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I like to do on the dominant, like on the either the tonic or the dominant of the first or the fifth scale degree, for example. And I also like to tell people that practicing with a tuner is not just about. I mean, of course, it's about the intonation, but also it trains our flexibility. So, of course, in real life, we're not playing with tuners, right? We're playing with, you know, humans. We're playing with other musicians, and so I think that just helps us to train the flexibility, whether it's in air moderation or in the embouchure, to be able to adapt to the situation, you know,
Yes.
to have that capacity as opposed to, if you can only play notes in a specific way, then you would lack the ability to adapt. And especially on the Baroque flute for example, if, say like in an orchestral situation, the flute is very often doubling the oboe and maybe it goes a little bit high or you're dealing with kind of thorny harmonies. Yeah, that practicing, I tend to basically always practice with a drone. I feel like that's just a lot more helpful. I use the needle as well, just kind of as a general reference. But
Right, right. Not, yeah, like I less and less do I ever like use a needle practicing like a sonata or something like that. I just think that's why I bring it up because in this particular case, I think it is useful, and especially for students to have that visual, like immediate. Because sometimes, especially if it's a fifth below, they're like, I don't know if I'm right or if I'm wrong, you know. So then you get the definitive, line in the middle,
it also
and then
makes practicing. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
you can learn to trust your ear a little more once you have that information, also. Mhm.
And also makes practicing just a lot more interesting than
Yeah, sure.
hearing yourself. You just you creates a little bit of also resonance for you to play with, and whether it's scales or actual music.
Yeah, and
You
I
know,
like the drone with headphones like what you're wearing the most. That I feel I can hear it the best
okay.
because it's not a real thing. It's not real instruments.
As opposed to having it just loud, like
Yeah,
just
yeah, I don't know why I can hear it better that way, so it's something to try. Mhm.
okay. Oh,
Amanda.
Amanda, please.
Hey, I just had a question. When you do the needle and when you have students I guess, coming from modern flute
Mhm.
going in, do you tell them, okay, you need to set your tuner in
Mm.
some temperament, or how do you? I'd love to hear whatever thoughts you have about that.
That's a great question. Yeah. Because some people only have equal temperament available on a tuner, but it's so easy to get something that has other things, right? So what I personally do, Amanda, and I don't know, maybe you have a better idea, go for it. What I do is I just keep changing it from day to day because that's real life, right? I'll use Vladi, then I'll use Werkmeister, then I'll use something. I'll just like put something on, and be like, can you be in tune to that fifth? Because it's not like you're gonna just do one, right? And they're really not that different. I don't find them to be particularly different.
I also feel, yeah, the I mean, there is some difference, but it is quite mostly really quite minimal. And again, it's a matter of training the flexibility, and it's
Yeah. I'm
yeah.
very glad that you keep using that word because that is sort of what it's all about, right? Is being flexible for the situation. And so if you're flexible, then you're presented with a slightly different low A in the bass. It's like, okay, fine. That's the A now, right? Like I don't have perfect pitch. So like going from 440 to 430 to 415, I'm like, okay, this is A today. That's fine. Like doesn't bother me any. So I feel the same way that if I had perfect pitch, I'd probably be going insane by now. But you can be flexible in that way. Okay.
Oh, and maybe along with that, just to add, because I recently encountered situation where, okay, so sometimes, somebody has an instrument and maybe they don't really have an opportunity to play with somebody. So I'm talking about a Baroque instrument. And so they kind of don't know where they are in terms of pitch. Yeah, because they just don't have the opportunity to play with people, or at least yet. Um, and so in that case, it's helpful. So they think maybe when they're playing, they're always too flat or they're always too sharp and whatnot. So I suggest in this case, see if you can, if they can do it with their tuner or get an app or a device that would actually tune to their instrument. So like kind of tune it to where their instrument is at first at least, because they just at the moment they don't have anybody to to play with. And and if they're a beginner, I think things can change a lot in the beginning as you're learning the instrument. So what you discover right now as either being too flat or too sharp, that can change once you are more proficient on the instrument. So that's some tip that I wanted to suggest, that if there's a
That's so interesting.
possibility
That
to have
reminds
a tuner that will kind of
Yeah.
fits to you, and then once you're more developed, you can check again and hopefully be able to play with other people, and then
So do you
assess that way.
do you mean that then you would see if you're in tune with yourself, even if you're completely flat all the time or completely sharp all the time?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to have
That's
the like your have set your zero, and
right.
then acquire the skills. Excuse me. And as you go along, those pitches, whether sharp or flat, they can change, because maybe they discover a different way of blowing or air moderation. And so don't get frustrated in the beginning at first, but after a while, then check it out again and reassess.
I love that idea. That's great. Thank you. Okay. Um, so I'm going to find another thing to um, share in terms of the exercises. I have several exercises dealing with just those pitches. Oh, you know what? I didn't actually explain the choice of the pitches yet, did I? Let me do that one more time. So um, these are the notes that I felt are like kind of straight ahead, the better bright pitches without so much effort. So you notice there's no F natural here, there's no A flat, etc., etc. But once you get high, they're pretty much all bright and it doesn't really make much difference. Like high F natural is a terrible note, but not because you need to blow softly, right? So these are just the notes that require more air than the others. That's kind of how I distinguished it. And I just find it helpful to this day to practice them separately from the other notes. Okay, so that's enough about that. I also have the arpeggios here that can be made from these. I have a couple different ways you can do the messa di voce on quarter notes. I'm gradually getting louder, etc. So I was just trying to be thorough in that regard. I do have an exercise there about harmonic function, that if, for example, you're playing a D and you are the tonic or the third or the fifth of the triad, you might be tuning it quite differently. So that is another way that you would be using a drone. So that's that. Okay, so now we get to the covered pitches. And these are notes like, F natural in both octaves, the two low octaves, and, A flat, B flat. So I discovered something by accident, which is that if you play an E flat without your first finger and you underblow it, you can get the B flat below. It's sort of an undertone, but the only way to get it is by blowing very gently. So if this is our regular E flat, if I lift this finger, I can still get that note, or so anyone with a flute right now, I really encourage you to try this one. This is probably the best exercise in the whole book. So you play a regular E flat, but then lift that first finger. If you play modern flute, it's the modern flute middle E flat fingering. Instead of, you try for. Anybody can't get that note, the lower note to speak? Great. Congratulations. That's good. I've had lots of students who at first could not. That's wonderful. Oh, good. Monica. Good. So lessen the air, less and less and less and less. And I'm purposely not saying what I mean by that. Loosen, relax anywhere you can until it comes out. And your first finger is up, right? Oh, no, no, no. Other first finger, the very first finger. That might explain it. This first finger, the very first finger. Oh, it came out. Wonderful. Let me just look in the chat. I think I got a question.
Yeah, Nama wonders, does it work differently on different models?
I have never found it to be different on different models. Nama, are you asking that for a reason? Have you found that it doesn't work? I'd love to know. I've tried it on almost every flute I've ever played.
Yeah, I just tried it and it was very easy. So I was wondering if on other instruments have more resistance. So I'm playing in I.H. Rothenberg, and it
Simple.
works. It's
It's
very simple. So I don't know.
It was simple for you because you know what you're doing.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Yeah.
going to say. It's simple for you, Nama.
Yeah, right. For her to say. Yeah. Nama is the person who first put a Baroque flute in my hands. And I'm so delighted that she's here. I went to her house and she had so many flutes, and I was like, oh, I'm in a candy store. This is amazing. And she got me addicted immediately. Okay, so for someone coming from the modern flute, this can be really difficult. And that difference of like, how do you blow for this and how do you blow for that is what you need for covered pitches. So let's try this. Go from the fake undertone B flat. Then don't move a muscle. and play a low F natural. So play it exactly the same way. And what I find easy, speaking of what Nama just said, it's easy to get the F natural, the pitch it's supposed to be when I'm blowing that way. That feels like it's supported, but it's really a small amount of air. So as Teddie was saying, blow less. What did you say? Blow. I think you said blow less is something that you often say.
Or slower air. This is really with very slow air.
Yes, it really is.
Or warm air, if you would. You're blowing really, yeah, very warm air.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And it's a very small amount of air too. I mean, I think you can still do it
Yes.
supported, which to me is fast, you know. I can go flat on that if I want to by not supporting. So this is a good way to distinguish the amount of air versus the speed of air, which is that I'm so how much support can you give and how much air can you give without popping? Right, that might be the harder part for Nama, who's so experienced to actually make it wrong about that.
I also want to mention there's something about, with that, so for that fake fingering as well as for any of these fork fingering notes that, it's just, it sounds, there's this kind of hollow transparency to it that it feels like, for me, it feels like it's not something you can hold on to, like a D or a G or any other brighter notes. There's something very solid about them, yeah, and you can, it's something you can, I imagine it. You can hold on to it nicely, whereas these covered notes, it's just very diffused. You can get more center and more. More center to it later, but in the beginning, it feels like you basically you want to let go. You can't hold on to anything somehow, because the moment you start to, pinch or try to, I need to get this, then it's just too sharp, for example.
It's like yin yoga, you got to just let go. Because you're going to be there a while, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people seem to know what that means. That's great.
Yeah, just releasing the air, not holding on to the air somehow.
Yeah, and our teacher Barbara Callauer used to say, just inhale on a low F natural. You're not even
Oh
going to
yeah, that was a good one.
So I love that. That was so funny.
Inhale. Maybe that's the retention. Maybe who was that? One of these the English guy was talking about.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Retention of the air. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I am playing in my performing life, if I'm spending a lot of time on my modern instruments, flute, piccolo especially, and I may not get to this, for a certain period of time. That definitely happens. In fact, I do it on purpose. If I have something like soloistic on a modern instrument, I still would prefer not to play this for a little while, just so I can really get into that sound. But then I quickly need to come back to this. This exercise with the undertone is always the first thing I'm going to do, because it reminds me, coming from modern flute, you have this muscle memory of this is how you blow. You put a flute up and you blow like this, and it is wrong on this instrument. I think I mentioned this in the book, which is that this blowhole, it's so much smaller. It's actually smaller than my modern piccolo blowhole, which doesn't make any sense in my mind, but I measured it and it is. It's like very strange. Okay, so this exercise I think is super important. You can, since the book came out, I've messed around further with that fingering and actually play like a G minor triad with this as the B flat, just to kind of feel where your air can be. Then you get a D usually that's too low because you're blowing so little. But that's a good exercise to try to get that correct. see a bunch of people playing. It's lovely. I just practice this way. I make stuff up from it. Like if I do this and if I do this back to back, like this is how, I don't know, it comes from so many years of having teachers. But one of my teachers used to say, you know, eventually you're going to teach yourself. And that, I think that, that's what I feel like I want to do now. Like I crave it, actually. It's great. Okay. Then I have an exercise of the messa di voce with all the covered pitches as I define them. And I will show you that one as well. So that's here. So it's really hard to get these. This reminds me of those different size of you know, dynamics. It's really hard to get these loud without going sharp, without having a horrible sound. So at first you don't go as loud as possible. And I'm doing all of those things that we talked about before. You know, I'm changing the shape of my mouth. My tongue is dropping, raising. More support, by the way. We haven't even mentioned that, but there's like support in general. Yes, should always be there, but the amount of support is important. You can increase support when you're flat. That will definitely help. So the notes I picked, and you know, these, to address Nama's question, these might be different on different flutes too. And the other thing that comes to mind is the multiphonics that are later in the book certainly could be different on different flutes. But these to me are the ones that are just tricky, and you have to be really careful how much air you use. And I did try to spell them differently going up and down if that was relevant, but the G flat's going to be there no matter what, and not an F sharp, right? There are certain passages where I use a G flat fingering instead of an F sharp because there's an E sharp, for example, you know, in the second octave. And this exercise is really good for that because you really are trying to make that sound really good and in tune. So I found it really helpful. Okay, I'm looking at the time and I think I should get to the extended techniques. Teddie, do you agree with me?
Oh, I think you're quite fine, but maybe one question also, with any of these tone exercises, yeah, you would recommend, you know, having a drone on the side, especially with these kind of covered notes.
Yeah, definitely. Same as before. Yeah, with a drone. I don't always do them with a drone. I mean, sometimes I need to hear myself. We're talking about tone, right? I mean, for pitch, the drone, but for tone, you don't want to imitate that. You know, it's usually a terrible sound. So I do them without a drone also. I think both are valuable. I think they're different. And when I'm warming up, like first thing, I do not play a low D first thing because it's always going to be flat and I'm going to feel terrible. I don't play anything really high. And I don't put my tuner on because, like you said, a beginner, like beginning of the day, I'm always flat because the instrument's cold. So I don't even look at it for a little while. I get myself warmed up first.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess,
Cool.
are there any questions? Don't see any questions so far.
Okay. So, you know, there's a bunch of other exercises. I'm not just going over every single one. We just don't have time. But then there's a third part. So my exercises have three parts. There's the bright pitches, the covered pitches, and then combining them, which of course is the real world. So I'm in part 3 for those of you following along, exercise 10. And this was a really interesting kind of discovery for me. And it's not my idea. I'm trying to find my notes about it so I say his name right. Castellani, that's his name, right? Who wrote this article. that I mention in the book. And he says, everybody talks about the fact that Baroque flute sound is uneven, should be uneven. But what does that actually mean? So for example, if you're playing a D major scale, it's pretty easy to be fairly even. But we all know if you make that a D minor scale, even melodic minor, which means you have an F natural, but the same notes at the top, B natural, C sharp, D. If you do that, you're not going to play your F natural like that. I mean, you have to play your F natural like that to make it in tune. But is that really what we do when we say, oh, Baroque flute, the idea is not to be even at all. It's fine to just play that note really softly. I think that sounds a little ridiculous. I think he's right, that that's not really what people do. What people do is they say, oh, I'm in a key that's got some covered notes, kind of a lot of them, or a really important one, like the third is a really sharp note. It's an F natural. I need to bring that down. I probably have to use less air. And what you really do is moderate the other notes around that so that you have something that sounds different from your D major scale. And so it's not even in the sense that you don't always sound the same. And the F natural will probably still be the softest thing around, but that's what most of us really do. And he wrote this article like spelling it out, which I so appreciate. I don't know who he is, but I thought it was mind-blowing for me. So I have the first exercise in the book about combining the pitches is you play a D major scale, then just going up that first octave, and then a D minor melodic scale going up the first octave. And the truth is that before you get to the third note, you should be able to tell which scale you're playing by the tone. And this is why people like Quant say that certain keys have certain affect, because they really do. They really sound really different if you're playing the flute in this way. So I thought it was fantastic, and it wasn't my idea, but I made this little exercise about it. So we can all try that if you want. And then here, I think you can see my cursor, we have, say, mezzo piano or something, just as a way to explain that. So now just play the first two notes, decide in your head which one you're going to do, major or minor, and play the first two notes. So which one was I going to do? It should be clear from the first two notes, right? I was going to do a major scale. My E was too high, but anyway, nobody's perfect. Okay,
That's
so that,
yeah.
go ahead, Teddie.
Oh no, it's just I think I was never I think I was never just really conscious of that. But the fact that you pointed out in this exercise is really true. And okay, so the Easter season has dawned upon us, especially here in Germany. So St. John Passion, right, left and right, and a lot of B flat major, D minor, playing in flat keys, and playing in a key like B flat major, for example, or even F minor in the famous aria, of course. So you learn to temper not just to make the covered notes sound good, but also, or sound brighter, but also temper the bright notes so that they are in better balance with the covered notes, and that overall then creates a specific color for the key. F minor, you're not going to get much volume out of F minor. But
Sure.
yeah, but that's also part of the expression, of course, of the music.
Yeah.
You know?
It's a good thing he wrote it as high as he did, because otherwise we wouldn't be heard at all.
Yeah. Well, some parts. There are still some
Sure.
not so great parts in
Yeah. Those are better off not heard, probably, those low
there.
G flat.
We'll just let the Katya take over those.
Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe also in terms of, whether tone or also, I think tone, intonation, and color, they're all connected somehow. And in those kind of instances, you also um, um, learn how to kind of play and blend with, learning how to play and blend with your colleagues, and that you learn to produce a different color than as opposed to if you're playing solo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For sure.
So it's a different thing whether you're playing with others or whether you're playing solo, and that also has an influence on.
That's true. Yeah. And partly why I always need exercises, like I keep making stuff up like this for myself, modern flute, whatever, because you need to listen, for sure, you do, but you need muscle memory. You can't just listen and say, oh, I need to do that. If your body doesn't know how to do it, you have nowhere to go when you get to the rehearsal or the concert. You have to be able to remind yourself physically. At least I do.
Definitely. And it's not something that you can just, go from one day to the next. It takes time to develop that memory, to develop the strength and also the trust, that you're able to do it, or that your body is doing it, and trusting that coordination. And sometimes people come to me where they tend to say in the third register, or you just higher notes, higher register on the flute, for example. That's hard for them, and they either their air is trembling or their lips are trembling, and that's just a sign, well, you haven't quite developed the right the muscles and the strength.
Yeah, and that there's no substitute for doing something every day. If you're not doing it every day, it's probably not going to get better. And real life is that we don't always have time, right? Like some of my students play like 3-4 instruments, even my amateur students. So you just might not have time, but that's when it gets better, is you do it frequently.
Definitely. Yeah. So I always I know it can be kind of a tedious process, especially as we see on the Baroque flute. There are I feel another thing about the special technique that we need on the Baroque flute is that it's like we kind of have to generate our own acoustic, our own kind of way of playing, so that it plays nicely. Like we have to work on ourselves a lot somehow, and that maybe it can be frustrating at first. And I try to tell people, just be patient with yourself, and it takes time, and it's absolutely normal that
it's so worth
a
it.
process.
Yeah, I don't find any of this tedious at all. For me, it's like great fun, but you do have to feel that way. If you're not enjoying your practice, then practice a different way, I guess. Yeah. Okay, so the last section of the exercises is extended techniques. And again, this was not my idea originally. Obviously, extended techniques. First of all, there are harmonics and stuff in 18th century treatises. And then in the 20th century, Robert Dick wrote a book for the modern flute called Tone Development Through Extended Techniques. And his thesis is that practicing on the modern flute, things like multiphonics, harmonics, they're cool when the composers ask you to do them, but also they actually make you sound better because it's so hard. You're asking your mouth to do something so specific, and then when you just go play a regular B-flat scale, you sound better, actually. And I think he's right about that on the modern flute for sure. And I decided to credit him and use the same idea here. So I think we should talk about a few of those. So one thing is pitch bending. So I was kind of talking about this and referencing it when I talked about the messa di voce, but if you take one note, and you can use a needle for this one too, it's very satisfying to see that, oh, I'm going really flat and I'm going really sharp, because that's what you're trying to do. With like a decent tone. Extreme ends probably not my best tone, but with a decent tone, you lower the jaw, you're going extreme ah, lower the tongue, roll in a little bit. Sometimes you need a breath in the middle, it takes a while. This should be not really with a change of dynamics, and that's another good way to feel the difference between amount of air and speed of air. So you're going to use the kind of same amount of air. You're going to be pretty consistent with that, and change the pitch. So this is the word that Teddie keeps using today, which I love, which is flexibility. You need this flexibility. For example, anybody ever have trouble with the note F sharp, low or middle, that it's just too flat and you have trouble getting it high enough? I certainly sometimes did or do. And when I do this exercise on that note, I'm reminded that actually, if you use all your techniques, you can actually make it sharp. So then why are you not in tune? Like, then you can get it up to pitch at least, right? If you practice going a little more, then getting it where it needs to be for a certain temperament, or say you're the fifth of the chord on an F sharp and you want it a little higher maybe or something.
Eve, you talked about using the tongue, yeah. The tongue shape and stuff. Yeah, that's also a different way than I would also think about it. But because I think about the jaw or the lower lip, for example. So would you say that's the same? It's the same thing?
No, it's not the same thing to me. What do you mean about the lower lip, though?
Well, whether you have like, imagine you're kind of protruding having the lower lip protrude more, or forward or
Like,
backwards.
if I do that, I'm gonna get a higher note, like this protruding. Is that what you're talking about or not?
Well, you can still affect influence intonation by
Oh, you're just talking about for changing pitch.
yeah,
But just moving this forward.
moving,
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I went too far, basically. I see. Yes. Okay. I don't think it's the same thing, but I think it's related to the jaw movement. I have found that it's slightly problematic to talk about moving the jaw. Some people tend to tighten here. With certain people, it's a little dangerous to talk about opening and closing. So that's why I like to just think of it as a vowel, like it's happening in your mouth. Of course, your jaw follows, absolutely. And if you let your tongue follow, I think you get more benefit and more flexibility. That's what I've recently been messing around with, is really calling it the tongue on the bottom or the tongue really high. You can even hear it in my voice, like it's just different. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'll have to think about that. Yeah, great.
So I have, of course, harmonics in the book. I make a little bit of an issue of, is the key going to be down or not with some of the harmonics, because that changes what note you can get out of the harmonic fingering. And I had to really think about that, because I am a Baroque flute player who always uses the key whenever possible. Like B, A, and G. My key is down. I'm a modern flute person, and I don't hear any difference in tone, and I hear a big difference that I'm actually balanced and I can hold the flute. So I
You're
used to
not
keep
alone, Eve.
all right, do you do that?
I do that.
And I understand.
Amanda does. Amanda's smiling. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, it's funny because you both studied with Kate Clark, right? Did you both? Yeah, Amanda did. Yeah, yeah.
Similar from similar schools, yeah.
Right, right. So I used to not tell anybody because the fingering charts are so clear. They're so clear. And I used to keep it was like I was in the closet about the key. And then I met Kate and she was like, "Oh, of course." I saw her play a concert and I noticed it. So I asked her about it at the NFA convention. And she said, "Well, why wouldn't you? It's so much easier." She's so spectacular. By the way, there is a very short video of her talking about how to get a good tone on the Baroque flute. Kate Clark, I'm saying the name right. I have a really hard time remembering names. Yeah. It's a very short video. And it's very helpful. And I recommend everybody go find it on YouTube. What's very funny about that is that when she demonstrates a bad tone, it's not bad at all because she's not capable of playing a bad tone. It's just so amusing to me, but she's gorgeous. She sounds amazing. Okay, so that's something with the key and the harmonics.
Maybe I'll just want to add, well, this is one of the, should I say, advantages of the Baroque flute. We were talking about playing with a key or without a key, is that we have options. And
Yeah.
some fingerings might not work on specific models, but on the other hand, there are usually a good number of other options for notes, and those can be really helpful for us in different situations. So I was posting recently about using a specific B natural fingering, a second octave. That's
I saw that.
kind of famous. Yeah, I mean that's just a great thing to have if you want to play B natural, in tune, in pianissimo, blending with others in difficult situations, and yeah, and so basically I would always suggest, go for what works for you, what works for the situation, and yeah, be creative about that. And that's actually also part of the fun. Sometimes it's also, maybe technically you have a technical passage and which finger combinations work the best, talking about G flat versus F sharp. There are times when G flat is going to work better compared to F sharp. And then
That's great. Great to hear you confirm all of that. Wonderful. So the last exercise in the book, and the thing I kind of want to end on, is multiphonics, where you can actually get two notes to speak at the same time on the Baroque flute. They're very, very hard, and I have quite a few of them that I just discovered, literally just like making up fingerings and seeing what I could blow. And you could probably find more. I encourage you to do that. The ones that I wrote here are hard enough. They've kept me busy. Hold on, there's a question from Mark. The slurs that are not on the page in the harmonic exercises. I'm not sure what you mean. Harmonic exercises.
You had said at one point when we were with my lesson that you wanted me to slur between the harmonics as I moved from the second to the third to the fourth harmonic. You wanted them to be slurred, and you said, "Oh, I didn't put that in the book. Didn't I put that in the book?" And then you went to get the book and you said, "Oh, they're not there." Am I misremembering that?
No, I think what's not there is the dynamics. Did we talk about dynamics yet?
No, we talked about slurs.
Okay. I mean, I'm looking at the page, and
Between
they
the
are, yeah. So like, sorry. Is that what you mean, that you would slur to the real fingering?
no, between on the top line, on the first line of the exercises,
Oh, the
you
first
move
line.
from the first to the
Gotcha.
second to the third.
Thank you. Okay. So if you play, I'm using E flat right now. If you play a harmonic, etc. Sorry if I'm skipping a step. If you don't know how to do a harmonic, we should maybe talk afterwards. But Mark's bringing up a really good point in that it is harder, actually, to slur to it. And by the way, going down on the harmonics is equally valuable and important. People forget to practice that all the time. They only go up and then they get tired or bored and they, but very good. Okay, and then the even harder way to practice it, which is good for us. As you slur to the second one, you get softer. Then you'll really feel the difference between airspeed and air volume. Right? I do this on modern flute all the time. Exactly the same issue. Okay, thank you, Mark, for reminding me about that. And I meant to talk about the dynamics too, and I didn't. So yeah, so if we print it up again, I'll change a couple things. Good idea.
So,
Okay.
so I'm looking at page 55. Is that, and I see
That's
slurs, but I see no dynamics. Is that what you mean?
He was actually going back to the he was going back to the harmonics on page like 53, 54.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I haven't done the multiphonics yet. So on page 55, let me just demonstrate one for those of you who don't have it in front of you. Okay, I'm going to show you this one. Sorry about all the noise. I live in a city and there's just something going on out there. I don't know what it is, but it's very noisy where I am. Okay, so it's not a mistake. We can play two notes at the same time. So you've probably noticed that the fingering is the same. Try it if you got your flute. It's very fun. So you might hear from me, like it's kind of coming in and out. That happens, like depends on the day. I find it really hard to talk and play at the same time, so it's probably not the steadiest. And sometimes that happens and sometimes it doesn't. And I still consider it useful and effective practicing. Much harder to go down for me. So you're moving your lips as you would for a high note and then just not quite as much. And I find it helpful to kind of open the embouchure a little bit more than I normally would. And you kind of catch the position of both notes at the same time. Keep your air moving the whole time. If they don't come out at all ever, sometimes you can try a little puff of air. Like no tongue at all. You might actually hear it for the first time there and then realize it's possible. That works on the modern flute too, by the way.
That's not something I've ever done or done much at all
Oh,
in
I'm so happy.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think in The Hague was very much kind of, yeah, early music oriented and not so much about incorporating kind of modern techniques into Baroque flute playing.
Yeah, and again, a composer could ask you to do this on the modern flute, just like Robert Dick says in his modern book, right? But that's really not the point. The point is if you can do that, you can probably put a normal note wherever you need it to be, right? It's just useful. And again, regular practice is the best.
Yeah, and you know, don't feel free to try things out. Doesn't mean that when we're playing a historical flutes that we're limited to only using historical sources or yeah, taking materials from anything that can help. Yeah. Sometimes though, people have come up to me and say, well, is it helpful to practice Moïse de la Sonorité on the Baroque flute or Yeah, any other modern.
No, I don't. Personally, for me, I guess because I play modern flute, it's too confusing. What is the goal? If you really think about the goal of that book, it is homogeneity of sound. That is his stated goal. And if we are not doing that, if we're not matching a G above the staff to a G flat above the staff, what are we doing? I mean, you can play any of those exercises. You can play that, the first exercise in that book, you know, it's a chromatic scale is what it is. You know, you can play that, but with a very different goal in mind, I guess. Maybe with a tuner.
Yeah, I would also say that, you know, with these are definitely, you know, obviously exercises for the modern flute, and I think you just wouldn't get the same kind of support and instruction, and in terms of like perspective that you would get, yeah, otherwise, and it's not helpful.
Now you can just send them to my book.
Of course, yeah.
Speaking of which, I'm going to put a link in the chat for everybody. If you don't have the book and you want it, it would be nice for you to know where to buy it. So let me
Great.
get that set up. Does anybody have questions?
Yeah, just want to say, in the meanwhile, are there any questions? Anything doesn't necessarily need to be tone related, or do you have any dire Baroque flute situation you'd like us to help us on?
That's great.
Okay. Or maybe, oh, there's Veronica. Go ahead. Hey there.
Hi, Teddie. Really nice to see you again. Thank you for organizing this.
Thank you for
And
coming.
Eve, yeah, Eve, thank you so much for sharing. I have also been switching between modern and Baroque flute, and I've noticed something about where this, like where I imagine the tone is coming from in my mouth, and I'm just wondering if you had a similar experience. That I feel like on Baroque flute, it's like a weird visualization, but as if the tone is coming from the front part of my mouth where the tongue is, like the tip of the tongue is. Whereas when I play modern flute, I feel like this kind of release in the back of my neck, and like the tone is maybe coming from somewhere near the top of my throat. And I'm just wondering if you've had anything like that, or if you visualize it differently.
That's so beautiful. You have a great imagination. I have experienced the first one where you feel like it's from here. Excuse me. And what I thought you were going to say is modern flute comes from like the basement, which is what it feels like. So, excuse me. That would be my analogy for that. But I'm going to try that one. You said like right back here.
Yeah, but I'll experiment with yours too, just because I think that was one way of me conceptualizing the muscle memory difference of being able to switch back and forth.
Yes.
Just figuring out where I would get the most resonance, and I found that my modern flute playing would sound really tight when I had that front of the mouth conception, and that so yeah, I'm just curious to hear other people's experiences also.
It's great. You're talking about like conception and resonance and the shape is all so good as long as we combine that with the motion of the air. I think as players we can get a little too concerned with what's the shape, what's the tongue doing, but what's the air doing, because it's a woodwind instrument and the air has to be moving always. Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're in Waltham? I know Waltham.
Yeah, in the Boston area, near Nama.
Oh, I love Boston. So I put a link to Prima La Musica, which is the publisher, and he's got a couple books. Mostly he publishes music, but my book is one of them. So on that page, you will find my book. And Teddie, is it okay if I just put my email address in the chat?
Of course, yeah, please go ahead.
But any of you, if you have follow-up questions or want to get in touch, that's how you can reach me.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and if any of you have any more questions, maybe something that occurs afterwards, feel free to contact any one of us. Yeah, we'd love to hear from you and see how we can help. And I hope this session has been useful. Hopefully, you've all got some kind of takeaway today, whether it'll be helping to improve your playing or make you enjoy the Baroque flute more, or also for fellow colleagues out there, maybe collecting new ideas in terms of how to teach the Baroque flute playing. Maybe hopefully you've got some new ideas now that you can try out in your next lessons, and I know that I certainly have some that would be exciting to use. Great. Thank you, Eve, so much for spending the time with us. Thank you all for being here and for taking the
Teddie,
time.
thank you so much for asking to do this. I really, really appreciate it. And I have to say, Teddie's summary at the beginning makes me feel so heard that like she got exactly what I was going for in my book. And she and I had a chat, before the session, and it was like, like, when you're writing something, you don't know what's going to happen. And she really made me feel like it was useful, and I so appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. I mean, it wouldn't have worked out if I didn't find resonance in it. So it works both ways. Yeah. So otherwise, Teddie Talks Traverso starts again or picks up on April 26th with a workshop on 24 tips and techniques on François Couperin's second Concerto. So why the second Concerto? Because it's just such a beautiful piece to play on the Baroque Traverso. The key of D major is our home key, and there are also movements in D minor. So that's a great excuse to practice those awful F naturals, if you would. There are also just so many beautiful movements, and it's honestly, I can tell you already there will be more than 24 tips you'll be getting from me. Sign up is through my Eventbrite page, as you all know now. And I also want to draw your attention to my next Let's Chat event, which will be in May with the recorder luminary Eva Lejeune. For recorder players out there, her name probably needs no further introduction. Our long-standing, vastly knowledgeable and respectable player and performer, educator on recorder. And she'll be sharing with us some words of wisdom from herself, as well as from her mentors, such as Franz Brücken and Gustav Leonhardt. So I hope you join us, and we look forward to seeing you there as well. And for those of you who like to receive further Traverso playing tips, as well as updates on my events here, I invite you to sign up for my newsletter. Reach out to me either through my website or through Eventbrite, and this newsletter will then be delivered to your inbox directly. So thank you, and continue to play the Baroque flute. Have fun with it. Take care for now, and enjoy the rest of your early music day, and also have a good weekend.
Thank you
all
so much. Thank
You're
you.
very welcome. Okay, take care
Thank
now,
you.
everyone.
That was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Take care now.